The dust kicked up around her skirts as Victoria Owens pressed the pen harder against the paper. Her third letter this week to a mother who would never write back. The ink smudged under her trembling hand, mixing with the tear that had just fallen onto the word lonely. And she didn't notice the tall figure that had stopped his horse right beside the bench where she sat outside the general store in Quartz Hill, California, on this scorching afternoon in June of 1876. "That's a lot of letters for 1 week," came a voice rough as desert sand, but somehow warm underneath. Victoria's head snapped up, her honey-colored hair catching the brutal sunlight as she shielded her eyes to look at the stranger. He sat atop a dusty palomino, his weather-beaten hat tilted back just enough to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds over the Sierra Nevada. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble, and his shirt had seen better days, but there was something about the way he held himself that suggested a man who had once known better circumstances. "I beg your pardon," Victoria said, pressing the letter against her chest protectively. "Been watching you for 3 days now," he said, dismounting with practiced ease. "Every afternoon, same bench, writing letters. You seal them up, walk them to the post office, come back and start another one the next day. That's quite presumptuous of you to be watching me, Mr. Xander." "Lyle Xander." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell just past his collar. "And I wasn't trying to be presumptuous. I just noticed, is all. A man gets curious when he's been alone on the range for as long as I have." Victoria felt her cheeks warm, though whether from the sun or his attention, she couldn't say. "Well, Mr. Xander, my correspondence is my own business." "Fair enough." He started to walk past her into the general store, then paused. "Though I'll say this seems mighty lonely, writing all those letters to people who aren't here, when there's plenty of people right in front of you who are." The words struck something deep in Victoria's chest, something she had been trying to ignore for the 6 months since she had arrived in Quartz Hill. She watched him disappear into the store, her letter forgotten in her lap. She had come west from Boston after her mother's death, following her older brother Marcus, who had promised her a fresh start, a new life away from the suffocating expectations of East Coast society. But Marcus had been shot dead in a card game gone wrong 2 months after her arrival, leaving her alone in a rough mining town with barely enough money to rent a room above the seamstress shop. The letters home to aunts and cousins and family friends had become her lifeline, her way of holding on to the world she had known, even if most of them went unanswered. Victoria stood abruptly, gathering her writing materials. She wouldn't let some stranger make her feel guilty about the one thing that brought her comfort. She marched toward the post office, her boots clicking against the wooden boardwalk, but as she approached the window, she found herself hesitating. The postmaster, old Henry Walsh, gave her his usual sympathetic smile. "Another one for Boston, Miss Owens." "Yes, please." She handed over the letter and the coins, watching as he added it to the stack of outgoing mail. She wondered, not for the first time, if anyone back east even read them anymore. Her mother had been the one who insisted on regular correspondence, who valued the written word above all else. Without her, Victoria suspected the letters simply piled up on her Aunt Margaret's sideboard, unopened and unwanted. When she emerged back into the sunlight, Lyle Xander was leaning against a post outside the general store, a bag of supplies at his feet. He straightened when he saw her. "I apologize if I offended you," he said. "Got no right to comment on your personal affairs." Victoria studied him more carefully now. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28 or 29, only a handful of years older than her own 23. There were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and his hands were calloused from hard work, but there was intelligence in his gaze and something else, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Where do you ride from, Mr. Xander?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Got a small spread about 10 miles east of here. Nothing fancy, just a cabin and enough land for a few head of cattle. I come into town once a week for supplies." He picked up his bag. "Usually don't talk to anyone much beyond old Henry and the store clerk." "Then why did you talk to me?" He considered this for a long moment. "Because watching you write those letters, there's something in your face, like you're trying to reach across a great distance. I know that feeling. Been writing letters myself for years, to a father who died before I could reconcile with him, to brothers scattered across the territories, to a life I used to have." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "And does it help, the writing?" "Sometimes. But I've been thinking lately that maybe I'm writing to ghosts when I should be living with the people still breathing." He adjusted his hat. "Anyway, that's more than I usually say in a month. I'll let you be." "Wait," Victoria said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "I'm Victoria." "Victoria Owens." His face softened into something approaching a smile. "Pleased to make your proper acquaintance, Miss Owens." "Would you?" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you like to take some refreshment at the hotel restaurant? I find myself with an hour before I'm expected at the seamstress shop." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something that looked almost like hope. "I'd like that very much." The hotel restaurant was nearly empty in the afternoon lull, and they took a table near the window where a weak breeze occasionally stirred the curtains. Lyle ordered coffee and apple pie, and Victoria requested lemonade and the same. For a few minutes, they sat in slightly awkward silence, both seeming to realize they had forgotten how to make conversation with another person. "You work at the seamstress shop?" Lyle finally asked. "Yes. I do alterations mostly, though Mrs. Chen is teaching me to make full garments. She's very patient with my clumsy fingers." Victoria smiled faintly. "I was never very good at needlework back home, but necessity has made me learn quickly." "Back home being Boston?" "Yes. I came here with my brother Marcus 6 months ago. He had dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields." Her voice dropped. "He died in April." "I'm sorry." Lyle's expression was genuinely sympathetic. "That's a hard thing to bear alone. The letters help me remember there's still family somewhere, even if they're far away, even if they don't always write back." She stirred her lemonade with her spoon. "I suppose that sounds foolish to someone like you, who's clearly learned to survive on his own." "Surviving isn't the same as living," Lyle said quietly. "I spent the last 5 years just surviving. Working dawn to dusk, speaking to no one, building something I'm not even sure I want anymore because there's no one to share it with." The pie arrived, and they ate in more comfortable silence for a while. Victoria found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way his rough hands handled the delicate fork with unexpected care, the way his eyes kept drifting to the window as if constantly assessing the world for threats or opportunities. "Why did you come to California?" she asked. "Same reason as most, running from something, hoping to find something else." He set down his fork. "I was the youngest of 4 boys in a farming family in Missouri. Father wanted us all to stay and work the land, but I had other ideas, wanted to see the world, make my own way. We fought about it for years, said things that can't be unsaid. When I finally left, he told me not to come back. Did you ever reconcile? He died 2 years after I left. My oldest brother wrote to tell me, said Father had been asking for me at the end." Lyle's jaw tightened. "By the time the letter reached me, he'd been in the ground for 3 months. I've been carrying that weight ever since." Victoria reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "I'm sorry. That's a terrible burden. It taught me something, though. Taught me that waiting to say the important things, waiting to make connections, waiting for the right time. It's all a fool's game. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. He met her eyes. So when I see a beautiful woman sitting alone on a bench, writing letters to people who aren't here, I figure maybe I should say something instead of riding past like I've been doing. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks again, but this time she didn't look away. You think I'm beautiful. I think you're about the most beautiful thing I've seen in 5 years of empty sunsets. The words were simple, unpolished, but they carried a weight of sincerity that made Victoria's heart skip. No one had spoken to her like that before, not the proper suitors in Boston who had courted her with practiced phrases, not the rough miners who had propositioned her with crude suggestions when she first arrived in Quartz Hill. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. He finished his pie and stood. I should get back before dark. Long ride ahead. Victoria stood as well, suddenly not wanting him to leave. Will you come back to town next week? I always do. Every Saturday like clockwork. Then perhaps I'll see you at the general store, Saturday afternoon. I'd like that. He paid for their refreshments despite her protests, then tipped his hat to her. Thank you for the company, Miss Owens. It's been the best afternoon I've had in a long while. She watched him walk out, watched him mount his Palomino and ride east into the endless brown landscape. Only then did she realize she was still holding her reticule with her writing supplies inside. And for the first time in months, she had no desire to pull them out. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Victoria found herself constantly distracted at the seamstress shop, pricking her fingers more than usual, having to rip out and redo seams. Mrs. Chen, a sharp-eyed woman from Canton who had come to California 20 years earlier, noticed immediately. You have a man on your mind, she said on Thursday, not bothering to make it a question. I barely know him, Victoria protested, threading a needle for the third time. The heart does not wait for the mind to know everything. Mrs. Chen's English was precise, colored with the accent of her homeland. Is he a good man? I think so. He seemed honest, kind. Victoria paused. Lonely like me. Lonely people either help each other or hurt each other. You must watch carefully to see which he will be, Mrs. Chen handed her a piece of blue calico to hem. But I see how you smile when you think of him. That is a good sign. Saturday arrived with a heat wave that made the whole town feel like a cookstove. Victoria dressed carefully that morning, choosing her lightest cotton dress in pale green, pinning her hair up to keep it off her neck. She felt foolish for the care she was taking. What if he didn't come? What if he had forgotten about her entirely? But when she walked past the general store at 2 in the afternoon, his Palomino was already tied outside. Her heart hammered as she pushed through the door. Lyle was at the counter, talking to the clerk about horseshoes, but he turned at the sound of the bell and his whole face transformed when he saw her. Miss Owens, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her name sound like music. Mr. Xander. She moved toward him, suddenly shy. I hoped I might see you. I got here early, he admitted. Been waiting about an hour. The confession made her smile. Well, I'm here now. So you are. He completed his purchase, then offered her his arm. Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you. They walked through town, drawing a few curious glances from neighbors, and headed toward the outskirts where the buildings gave way to scrubland. Lyle led her to a small rise that overlooked the valley, where the mountains rose in the distance, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. I come here sometimes when I'm in town, he said. It reminds me that there's beauty in this hard land, even when it doesn't feel like it. Victoria stood beside him, feeling the heat radiating from the earth, watching the way the light moved across the landscape. It's lovely. "I've been thinking about you all week," Lyle said abruptly. "About what you said about your letters, and I realized I never asked you what you write about." "Oh," Victoria twisted her hands together. "Just ordinary things, I suppose. What the weather is like, what work I'm doing, how I'm managing. I write about Marcus sometimes, trying to make sense of his death. I write about how different everything is from Boston." She paused. "I write about being lonely. And does anyone write back? My Aunt Margaret sends a letter every few weeks. Brief, mostly news about people I barely remember. My cousin Elizabeth wrote once 3 months ago. Everyone else," she shrugged. "I think they've forgotten about me, or maybe they never cared much to begin with." Lyle was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why keep writing to people who don't write back? Why not spend that time on something someone here?" It was the question Victoria had been asking herself all week. "Because I'm frightened," she said honestly. "Frightened that if I stop holding on to that connection, I'll disappear entirely. That I'll just become another forgotten person in a forgotten town, and my life will have meant nothing." "Your life means something right now, right here." Lyle turned to face her fully. "Look, I know I'm just a cowboy without much education or polish. I know I'm not the kind of man you're probably used to from Boston. But I see you, Victoria. I see how brave you are, coming all this way, surviving your brother's death, making a life in a place that's nothing like home. That's not nothing. That's everything." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes. "You barely know me. Then let me know you better. Spend time with me. Talk with me. Stop writing there," he gestured vaguely east toward Boston, "and start writing here with me." "Writing here," Victoria echoed, confused. "Not literally." "I mean," Lyle ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own words. "I mean, make your story here, make your life here, with people who are present, who want to know you." He took a breath. "With me, if you'll have me," Victoria's breath caught. "You're asking to court me." "I'm asking for a chance. To prove I can be someone worth your time, your attention. Someone who'll write letters to you every day if that's what you need. Except I'll hand them to you in person so you can see my face when I tell you how remarkable you are." It was perhaps the most unorthodox proposal Victoria had ever heard, and something about its raw honesty made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. This man, this lonely cowboy who had watched her from a distance and seen her pain, was offering her something no one else had: presence, attention, a future built on something other than memory and obligation. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across Lyle's face was like sunrise after a long night. He took her hands in his, and they stood on that hill overlooking Quartz Hill as the sun began its descent. Two lonely people finding something unexpected in each other. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Victoria had known in Boston. There were no formal calls, no chaperoned visits in parlors, no careful adherence to social rules that governed every interaction. Instead, Lyle came to town 3 times a week now instead of once, timing his visits to when Victoria finished work. They would walk together through the dusty streets, or sit on the bench outside the general store, the same bench where he had first spoken to her, and talk for hours. He told her about his life on the ranch, about the hard work of building something from nothing, about the satisfaction of watching his small herd grow, about the nights when the loneliness felt like it would swallow him whole. She told him about Boston, about her mother's illness and death, about Marcus's wild dreams and sad end, about the way she felt suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. "I sent one last letter to Aunt Margaret," Victoria told him one evening in July, 3 weeks into their courtship. "I told her I was settling here permanently, that she needn't worry about me anymore, and that I wouldn't be writing as frequently." "How did that feel?" Lyle asked. terrifying. Freeing, both at once. Victoria smiled at him. But it felt right. You were right, I was holding on to something that was already gone, and it was keeping me from fully living. I'm proud of you, Lyle said, and the simple statement made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. In August, he invited her to see his ranch. Mrs. Chen agreed to let her take a Sunday off, and Lyle arrived before dawn with a gentle mare for Victoria to ride. They rode out as the sun rose, painting the landscape in shades of pink and orange, and Victoria felt something in her chest expand as they left the town behind. The ranch was modest, a sturdy cabin Lyle had built himself, a barn that housed his palomino and 2 other horses, a corral where about 30 head of cattle grazed on the sparse grassland. But there was something appealing about its simplicity, its honesty. This was a place built by hard work and determination, not inherited wealth or social connection. It's not much, Lyle said, helping her dismount, but it's mine. Ours, maybe, if he stopped himself. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. Show me everything, Victoria said, ignoring the flutter in her stomach at his unfinished suggestion. He walked her through the property, explaining his plans for expansion, showing her the vegetable garden he had been trying to cultivate with limited success, introducing her to his horses by name. The cabin was sparse inside a main room with a fireplace and table, a small bedroom, a kitchen area that was barely more than a counter and stove. But it was clean and well-maintained, and Victoria could see the potential in it. I know it's not what you're used to, Lyle said, watching her face carefully. It's honest, Victoria replied. It's real. That's worth more than all the fancy houses in Boston. They spent the day together, and Lyle taught her how to help him tend the cattle, how to check fence lines, how to read the signs of the land. Victoria's dress got dirty and her face sunburned, and she had never been happier. When evening came, they sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge, so many more than were ever visible in Boston's gaslit streets. I could make a good life here, Victoria said softly, if I were invited to. Lyle took her hand. Victoria Owens, you've been invited since the moment I saw you on that bench. I was just waiting for you to be ready to hear it. They kissed for the first time that night, tentative and sweet, and Victoria felt the last pieces of her old life fall away like autumn leaves. September brought cooler weather and a marriage proposal, formal this time, with Lyle kneeling in the parlor of her room above the seamstress shop and offering her a simple gold band that had been his grandmother's. I know it's fast, he said. I know people will talk. But I'm 30 years old, Victoria, and I've spent enough of my life alone. I don't want to waste another minute of it without you. Yes, Victoria said, pulling him up to kiss her. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in October by the circuit preacher with Mrs. Chen and old Henry Walsh as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress she had sewn herself with Mrs. Chen's guidance, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar. Lyle wore his best shirt and pants, his hair freshly cut, his face shaved clean. The ceremony was brief and simple, held in the small church at the edge of town. But when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria felt more married than any elaborate Boston wedding could have made her. That night, in the cabin that was now her home, Lyle was gentle with her, patient with her nervousness, and the intimacy they shared felt like the natural continuation of everything they had been building together. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the simple bed, Victoria realized she hadn't thought about writing a letter home in weeks. Do you miss it? Lyle asked, as if reading her thoughts. Boston, your old life. Sometimes I miss my mother, Victoria admitted, but the rest of it, no. I don't miss being someone I wasn't, trying to fit into a mold that never quite suited me. Here, I can just be Victoria. Your wife, a seamstress, a rancher's partner. That's enough." "More than enough," Lyle murmured, kissing her temple. "You're everything." The first year of their marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. Victoria learned to manage the household, to tend the garden more successfully than Lyle had, to help with the cattle when needed. She continued working with Mrs. Chen 2 days a week, enjoying the friendship and the extra income. Lyle expanded the herd and built a larger barn. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, too tired most nights to do anything but fall into bed, but they were building something together, and that made every callus and backache worthwhile. In February of 1877, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Lyle on a cold morning when frost covered the ground and their breath misted in the air. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then immediately set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "I'm not fragile," she laughed. "Women have babies every day." "Not my wife carrying my baby," Lyle said, his hands protective on her still flat stomach. "That's a miracle, and I'll treat it as such." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though the summer heat made Victoria uncomfortable and irritable. Lyle was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water, fanning her on the porch in the evenings, taking over most of the heavy ranch work. Mrs. Chen made her loose dresses and shared herbal remedies for nausea and fatigue. "You are lucky in your husband, Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon, watching through the window as Lyle hauled water for the garden. "Many men do not care for their wives this way." "I know," Victoria said, her hand on her swollen belly. "I'm grateful every day." Their son was born in late September, arriving in the cabin with Mrs. Chen and the town doctor in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria wondered if she would survive it. But Lyle held her hand through all of it, talking to her, encouraging her, and finally, the baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant in Victoria's arms. "A healthy boy." Victoria looked down at her son, red-faced and angry at being born, but perfect in every way, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Lyle was beside her, tears streaming down his weathered face, touching the baby's tiny hand with his rough finger. "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. "Whatever you want," Lyle said. "Though I always liked my grandfather's name, Thomas." "Thomas Xander," Victoria said, trying it out. "Tommy, I like it." Tommy was a good baby, mostly content unless hungry or wet. Victoria marveled at how much love she could feel for someone so small, how her world had shifted to revolve around this tiny person. Lyle was a devoted father, taking over the nighttime feedings when they switched to a bottle after Victoria's milk dried up, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly decent voice. "Never thought I'd have this," Lil confessed one night, holding Tommy while Victoria prepared dinner. "A family, a wife I love, a son. Some days I wake up and think I'm dreaming." "We're real," Victoria assured him, kissing his cheek. "This is real and it's ours." A letter arrived from Boston in December, the first one Victoria had received in months. It was from Aunt Margaret, formal and somewhat cold, acknowledging Victoria's marriage and the birth of her son, with a brief note that the family was disappointed. She had chosen to remain in that rough place, but wished her well nonetheless. There was no invitation to visit, no offer of help, no real warmth. Victoria read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in the trunk where she kept her few precious belongings from her old life. She felt nothing, no hurt, no anger, just a distant acceptance that that chapter of her life was truly closed. "Everything all right?" Lyle asked, noticing her mood. "Everything's perfect," Victoria said, and meant it. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life: spring calving, summer heat, fall roundup, winter storms. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's honey-colored hair. In 1879, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Lyle's mother. Rose was quieter than Tommy had been, content to watch the world with solemn blue eyes. Lyle proved to be just as devoted to his daughter as his son, carrying her everywhere in the early months, teaching her to pet the horses gently, picking wildflowers for her when they grew on the range. Victoria watched him with their children and fell more in love with him every day. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They expanded the herd to nearly 100 head and built a larger house to replace the cabin, with a real parlor and separate bedrooms for the children. Victoria's vegetable garden flourished, and she learned to preserve food for the winter. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure in a way that felt earned. Quartz Hill grew too, adding more businesses and families. A schoolhouse was built, and when Tommy turned 6 in 1883, he started attending with a dozen other children. Victoria made friends among the other ranch wives, women who understood the particular challenges and rewards of frontier life. She and Mrs. Chen remained close, visiting each other regularly, and Mrs. Chen became honorary grandmother to Tommy and Rose. In 1884, Lyle hired a young hand named Pedro Martinez to help with the increased workload of the ranch. Pedro was 18, eager to learn, and had recently arrived from Mexico with his family who had settled nearby. He proved invaluable, working hard and learning quickly, and Victoria enjoyed teaching his mother English in exchange for learning Spanish recipes. One evening in the summer of 1885, as they sat on the porch watching Tommy and Rose play in the yard while the sun set, Lyle pulled Victoria close. "You ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When I saw you writing those letters?" "Sometimes," Victoria admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like that was a different person." In some ways it was. "We're both different now, older, maybe wiser, definitely more tired." He grinned. "But I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the time Tommy broke his arm falling out of that tree. Or when Rose got into the chicken coop and got pecked a dozen times. Not even those," Lyle said. "Every moment, good and hard, brought us here. To this porch, with those 2 miracles playing in the dust, with you in my arms. I'd live through 100 broken arms and chicken attacks for this." Victoria laughed. "You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm 39, not ancient, and you're only 32, so watch who you're calling old." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Victoria said, "I never thanked you properly, you know." "For what?" "For seeing me. For speaking to me that day instead of just riding past. For telling me to stop writing there and start writing here with you. You changed my whole life with that one conversation." "We changed each other's lives," Lyle corrected. "I was half dead when I met you, just going through the motions. You woke me up, reminded me what it meant to be alive, to love someone, to build something that mattered." "I did write one more letter after we married," Victoria confessed. "I never told you. I wrote to Aunt Margaret and told her about the wedding, about how happy I was. I told her that I had found a home, not just a place to live, but a real home with people who loved me. I told her I forgave her for not understanding, but that I wouldn't be writing again." "Did she respond?" "No, but I didn't need her to. I had already said everything I needed to say, and it was for me, not her." Victoria turned to look at her husband. "That was the last letter I wrote to my old life. Everything since then has been letters to this life, letters written in moments, in choices, in love." Lyle kissed her softly. "That's poetry, Victoria. Maybe I should write a book someday, tell our story. I'd read it, though I already know how it ends." "Oh, and how's that?" "Happily," Lyle said simply. "Happily ever after, right here on this ranch with you." In 1887, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again at age 34. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and there were complications that worried the doctor. She was ordered to rest for the last 3 months, which drove her restless nature crazy, but Lyle was firm about following doctor's orders. "I'm not losing you," he said when she protested. "If that means you have to stay in bed, then that's what happens." Rose, now 8 years old, became her mother's constant companion, bringing her books and needlework, chattering about school and friends. Tommy, at 10, tried to be helpful in his own way, sneaking her extra desserts and telling her jokes to make her laugh. Pedro's mother, Sophia, came by daily to help with cooking and housework, refusing any payment beyond friendship. The baby arrived in late January of 1888, a month early and frighteningly small. Another boy, tiny and struggling to breathe in the cold cabin. The doctor worked frantically while Victoria prayed harder than she ever had in her life, and Lyle paced outside in the snow. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the baby's cries grew stronger. "He's going to make it," the doctor announced. "He's a fighter." They named him Marcus, after Victoria's brother, and the baby did indeed prove to be a fighter. He grew slowly but steadily, and by his first birthday, he was nearly caught up to where he should be. Victoria had never been so grateful for anything in her life. The years continued to roll forward. Tommy grew into a serious young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Rose developed a passion for reading and declared she wanted to be a teacher. Marcus, despite his difficult start, became the most adventurous of the three, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. In 1895, when Victoria was 42 and Lyle was 49, they celebrated their 20th anniversary. Their children were now 18, 16, and 7, practically grown, with lives of their own beginning to unfold. Tommy was courting a girl from town, a rancher's daughter named Alice, who reminded Victoria of herself at that age, brave and willing to work hard. Rose had taken a position as a teacher's assistant at the schoolhouse and was saving money to attend a proper teaching college in San Francisco. Marcus was thriving in school and talking about becoming a veterinarian. "We did good," Lyle said as they got ready for the anniversary party their children had secretly planned. "Look at them, strong, smart, kind. Everything we hoped they'd be." "We did very good," Victoria agreed, fastening the simple pearl necklace Lyle had given her for their 10th anniversary. She looked at herself in the mirror, 42 now, her honey-colored hair threaded with gray, lines around her eyes and mouth from years of sun and laughter. She looked nothing like the frightened young woman who had sat on that bench writing desperate letters to a life that no longer existed. The party was small but joyful, held in their expanded house with neighbors and friends crowding in to celebrate. Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, raised a toast to the couple. "20 years ago, I told Victoria to watch carefully to see if this lonely cowboy would help or hurt her," Mrs. Chen said in her precise English. "I am very happy to have been proven right. He helped her, and she helped him, and together they built something beautiful." Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Victoria and Lyle walked out to their favorite spot on the small rise overlooking the ranch. The moon was full, casting silver light across the land they had worked so hard to build and maintain. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Victoria asked. "About writing letters." "I told you to stop writing to people who weren't here and start writing here with people who were," Lyle said. "Or something like that. I was nervous." "You changed my entire perspective with those words," Made me realize I was living in the past instead of the present. Made me see that life was happening right in front of me if I was willing to reach for it. And did you? Reach for it. Victoria took his weathered hand in hers. I reached for you, and you reached back, and we built this whole beautiful life together. 20 years, 3 children, a successful ranch, a real home, all because you had the courage to speak to a lonely woman on a bench. All because you had the courage to say yes, Lyle countered. To trust me, to marry me, to build this life with me. I was just a lonely cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and honest love. That was everything I needed, Victoria said. That is everything I need. They stood there under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against the odds, and Victoria sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the day she had been writing those letters, for the loneliness that had made her receptive to connection, for the cowboy who had seen her and spoken up. In the summer of 1900, Tommy married Alice in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Victoria and Lyle stood together, watching their oldest son promise his life to someone else, and Victoria felt the bittersweet pang of time passing. But it was mostly sweet. Tommy and Alice would be living on an adjacent property they had purchased, so they would still be close by. Rose left for San Francisco in the fall to attend the teaching college she had dreamed about, and though Victoria missed her daughter terribly, she was proud beyond words. Rose wrote long letters every week, detailing her studies and adventures in the city, and Victoria saved every one of them. Marcus, at 12, was already talking about the veterinary college he wanted to attend when he was older. He had a natural gift with animals, able to calm the most skittish horse or stubborn cow, and both Victoria and Lyle encouraged his dreams. "They're all leaving," Victoria said one evening, watching Marcus play with the ranch dogs in the yard. "One by one, they're growing up and leaving." "That means we did our job right," Lyle said, though she could hear the wistfulness in his voice too. "We raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams. Can't complain when they do exactly that. I'm not complaining, just feeling the passage of time." Lyle pulled her close. "We still have each other. We started with just the 2 of us, and we'll always have that." In 1902, Tommy and Alice welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Victoria after her grandmother. Victoria held her tiny namesake and marveled at becoming a grandmother at 49. Lyle was equally besotted, constantly finding excuses to walk over to Tommy and Alice's house to see the baby. "We're grandparents," he said one night, still sounding amazed. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? We're not old," Victoria protested. "We're experienced." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Rose came home from San Francisco that Christmas, bringing with her a young man named David, a fellow teacher she had met at college. Victoria liked him immediately. He was intelligent and kind and looked at Rose the way Lyle had looked at Victoria all those years ago. "She's going to marry him," Victoria whispered to Lyle as they watched Rose and David walk in the snow. "I know," Lyle said. "And we're going to let her, because he's good for her." Rose and David were married in 1903 in San Francisco, and though Victoria missed having the wedding at the ranch, she understood that Rose's life was in the city now. They visited twice a year, and Rose continued her faithful letter writing, keeping Victoria updated on every aspect of her life. Marcus left for veterinary college in 1906 at age 18, and suddenly the house was empty except for Victoria and Lyle. It should have felt lonely, echoing with the absence of their children, but instead it felt peaceful. They had done the hard work of raising their family, and now they could simply enjoy each other's company. "It's like those early days again," Victoria observed one morning over breakfast. "Just the 2 of us, figuring out how to be together." Except now I don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing and making you run away, Lyle teased. He was 60 now, his dark hair almost entirely gray, his face deeply lined from decades of outdoor work. But his gray eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had attracted Victoria all those years ago. "I was never going to run away," Victoria said. "From the moment you told me to start writing here with you, I was caught." They settled into a new rhythm, working the ranch with Pedro's help. Pedro was now 40 and married with 4 children of his own. Tommy helped run most of the day-to-day operations, giving Victoria and Lyle more time to simply enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. In 1908, Lyle had a health scare that terrified Victoria. He collapsed one afternoon while working with the cattle, and the doctor diagnosed heart trouble. He was ordered to take it easy, to reduce stress, to let others handle the heavy work. Lyle, predictably, hated it. "I'm not an invalid," he grumbled, confined to the house for 2 weeks of rest. "No, but you're also not 25 anymore," Victoria said firmly. "You've worked hard for 40 years, built this ranch from nothing, raised 3 children, lived a full life. It's okay to slow down now." "I'm only 62, that's not ancient. It's old enough to be smart about your health." Victoria sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand. "I need you, Lyle. I need you to be around for as long as possible, so please listen to the doctor. Listen to me." The fear in her voice got through to him in a way her logic hadn't. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, I'll slow down, but you have to promise me something, anything. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life writing letters to me after I'm gone. That you'll live, really live, no matter what happens." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "That's not even close to funny. I'm serious. I don't want you to go back to being that lonely woman on the bench, waiting for something that's not coming. If I go first, you keep living. You stay here with the children and grandchildren, you keep the ranch going, you find joy every single day. Promise me." "I promise," Victoria whispered. "But you're not going anywhere for a very long time. That's the plan." Lyle recovered from the scare, and though he did slow down, he remained active and engaged with the ranch and family. By 1910, they had 5 grandchildren. Tommy and Alice had added 2 sons to their daughter, and Rose and David had twin girls. Marcus was finishing his veterinary education and writing about a young woman he had met in his studies. "We're going to need a bigger table for holidays," Victoria joked, watching the chaos of a family dinner with children of all ages running around. "I'll build one," Lyle offered. He still did woodworking in his spare time, creating beautiful pieces from the lumber they could afford now. "You'll supervise while Tommy builds one," Victoria corrected. "Doctor's orders. Bossy woman. You love it." "I really do." In 1912, Marcus married his sweetheart, a veterinary assistant named Grace, in a ceremony at the ranch. All 3 of their children were now married, successfully launched into their own lives, and Victoria felt a deep satisfaction in knowing they had accomplished what they set out to do all those years ago. That night, after the celebration had ended and the house was quiet again, Victoria and Lyle sat on the porch they had sat on hundreds of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. 37 years, Victoria said softly. "Since that first day." "Best 37 years of my life," Lyle replied. "Every single day, even the hard ones. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just ridden past that day, if you hadn't stopped to talk to me? I try not to think about that. It's too sad imagining a life without you, without our children, without all of this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them. "I think I would have just kept getting lonelier until I disappeared entirely. And I would have eventually given up and gone back to Boston," Victoria said. Lived out my days as the spinster niece, never knowing what I was missing. So we saved each other. We did. You saved me from living in the past, and I saved you from disappearing into loneliness. And together, we built something that will outlast us both, our children, their children, this ranch, this home. Lyle stood and pulled Victoria to her feet, then into his arms. They swayed together slowly, dancing to music only they could hear, under the stars that had witnessed their entire journey together. "I love you," Lyle said. "From that first moment to this one and every moment after. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Xander." "I love you too," Victoria replied. "My lonely cowboy who wasn't afraid to speak up, who taught me to live in the present, who gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." They kissed, tender and familiar, a kiss that contained 37 years of love and laughter and hard work and triumph. When they finally went inside, Victoria paused at the desk where she kept her correspondence letters from Rose and Marcus, notes from friends in town, the practical papers of running a ranch and a life. She thought about that first day, sitting on the bench outside the general store, desperately writing letters to people who didn't care, trying to maintain a connection to a life that had never truly fit her. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had ridden up and challenged her to live differently, to write differently, to be present instead of distant. She sat down at the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. For a moment, her pen hovered over it, then she began to write. "My dearest Lyle," she wrote, even though he was in the next room. "Today marks 37 years since you told me to stop writing there and start writing here with you. This is the first of many letters I plan to write you, not to send across distance, but to hand to you in person, to tell you all the things I don't say often enough. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for speaking when it would have been easier to stay silent. Thank you for every day, every year, every moment of this beautiful life we've built together. You are my home, my heart, my everything. Forever yours, Victoria." She folded the letter and walked into their bedroom where Lyle was already preparing for bed. She handed it to him without a word. He unfolded it, read it, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. "You're going to make an old man cry. Good. You've made me cry happy tears for 37 years. It's only fair." They climbed into bed, and Lyle tucked the letter into the book on his nightstand, promising to keep it forever. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two souls who had found their way home against all odds. The years continued, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Lyle's health remained mostly stable, and Victoria stayed strong and active well into her 60s. The ranch continued to prosper under Tommy's management, and they saw their other children thrive in their chosen paths. Rose became a renowned educator in San Francisco, and Marcus established a successful veterinary practice in Sacramento. In 1920, the town of Quartz Hill held a celebration for its 50th anniversary, and Victoria and Lyle were honored as some of the longest-standing residents who had helped build the community. Standing before the crowd, Lyle told the story of how he had met his wife, a lonely cowboy speaking to a lonely woman writing letters to a past that no longer existed. "I told her to stop writing there and start writing here with me," Lyle said, his voice still strong at 74. "And she did. She took a chance on a rough cowboy with nothing but a small ranch and big dreams, and together we built a life. That's what this town is, people taking chances on each other, building something together, creating home where there was only wilderness." The crowd applauded, and Victoria stood beside her husband, holding his hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had created from one brave conversation on a dusty afternoon 44 years earlier. In 1925, They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a massive gathering at the ranch. All 3 children came home with their families, 13 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren at last count, with more on the way. The house overflowed with love and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a family that had grown far beyond what Victoria and Lyle had ever imagined possible. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, and the younger children had been put to bed, Victoria and Lyle walked once more to their favorite spot overlooking the ranch. They moved slower now, Lyle with a cane and Victoria with a slight limp from arthritis, but they still made the journey. 50 years, Victoria marveled. Half a century. Best decision I ever made, stopping to talk to you that day, Lyle said. Best decision I ever made, saying yes when you asked me to walk with you. Victoria leaned against him. Do you remember what you said about not writing to ghosts when you should be living with people still breathing? I do. It was the truest thing I'd ever said, and I didn't even fully understand it at the time. You understood enough to change both our lives completely. Victoria looked out at the land they had worked and loved for 5 decades. This is what we wrote together, Lyle. Not letters on paper, but a life, a family, a legacy. Every day was a new page, every year a new chapter, and we wrote it all together. And we're not done yet, Lyle said firmly. Still got more chapters to write. Many more, Victoria agreed. They stood together as the sun set on their 50th anniversary, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and gold. The ranch spread out before them, solid and real, built from decades of love and labor. Their children's children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Victoria thought about the frightened young woman she had been, clinging to the past through desperate letters that went mostly unanswered. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had been brave enough to speak, to reach out, to offer connection instead of staying silent. She thought about every moment between then and now, the joy and sorrow, the triumph and struggle, the ordinary days that had added up to an extraordinary life. Thank you, she whispered to Lyle, for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for this whole beautiful life. Thank you, he replied, kissing her forehead, for saying yes, for staying, for writing this story with me instead of writing to ghosts. As the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss and their wedding and the birth of their children and every significant moment of their 50 years together, Victoria and Lyle Xander stood hand in hand, grateful for the courage it had taken to start writing here together, and for every word of the beautiful story they had created. They walked back to the house slowly, surrounded by the sounds of their family, the family that existed because a lonely cowboy had stopped his horse beside a woman writing letters to a life that no longer mattered, and had the courage to say what needed saying. They walked into their home, not the small cabin they had started in, but the expanded house filled with memories and love, and closed the door on another perfect day of the life they had built together. The letters Victoria had once written to Boston had long since been forgotten, lost to time and distance. But the life she had written here, with Lyle, in every choice and every moment that was permanent, real, a testament to the power of being present and brave enough to reach for love when it appeared. And that story, their story, would live on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of love that began with a simple invitation to stop looking backward and start living forward, together.